I would like to introduce to you Ben Nielsen. And a little something about Ben before he comes on stage. He is the founder, chairman, and CEO of the Minerva project, a reinvented university experience for the brightest and most motivated students. And prior to that, Ben spent 10 years with Snapfish, seeing it through from an idea to the largest personal publishing service. After his talk, you can also join Ben in the small hall for a Minerva University workshop session, so don't miss that. Don't forget that right now we're starting an exciting Microsoft workshop in the small hall on using Windows Azure for M2M and IoT. I hope I said that correctly because I don't know that. But enough of this technical mambo jumbo. I want everyone to give a big round of applause for Ben. Woo! Yeah, welcome on stage.
How's everybody doing? Sounds pretty excited. This is the best reception I've ever gotten on a per capita basis, I think, of any talk I've ever given. And I've never actually given this talk before because I try never to give the same talk twice, not for your sake, but for my sake. Because I generally try not to fall asleep while talking, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you won't fall asleep while I'm talking. So net, we're going to try to keep it interested. So when I was asked to talk about something around entrepreneurship that I think is not talked about much, and especially through my own entrepreneurial journey, I was thinking that if I had to single out the single best element or the most important thing that distinguished why I have had whatever luck I've had or success I've had in the past, that one element is luck. Have you all met entrepreneurs who said, "Oh, I am so lucky. I've been so lucky that this happened. I've been so lucky that happened." Who have you? I mean, if you talk to successful entrepreneurs, have they generally attributed their success to luck? Yes or no? Just give me a raised show of hands. Majority of successful entrepreneurs you talk to, have they attributed it to luck or skill? Who here has generally heard that they attributed it to luck? Raise your hands, yeah. And who's attributed it to skill? Like they were worth it, yeah. Those people are lying, and far more self-aggrandize themselves than they should be, which is common among successful entrepreneurs, because they would like people to believe that the fortune that has been bestowed upon them was somehow their incredible skill. Unfortunately, especially because most of these people are really self-centered and really just awful human beings, but unfortunately, in some ways, they're kind of right also. And that's because even though much of entrepreneurial success is governed by luck, luck isn't what we think it is. So it turns out that there was a group that went and studied what luck is. And they did a very interesting study. They took a bunch of subjects in a psychological experiment, and they asked them one question. One question was, do you consider yourself to be lucky? They didn't shoot them afterwards, but they asked them the question. They just answered yes or no. And then after they asked that one question, they put them individually, they showed them into a room, and they gave them a book. And in that book, they told them were a number of pictures. And it was their job to sit down and count the number of pictures in the book. Write the number of pictures on a piece of paper and leave the room. Very simple instructions. Now here's the twist. The twist was that underneath every picture was a caption. And the caption said, "You don't need to count the number of pictures in this book. The experiment is over. Please leave." Now, what do you think happened? Well, it turns out that by quite a substantial margin, those people who answered the question that they were lucky saw the caption, read it, closed the book, and left. And by quite a large margin, those who said that they were unlucky never read the caption. Sat in the room, counted every single picture in that book, wrote it on a piece of paper, and left. And so what the research showed is that luck is really the combination of two things: observation, being able to see opportunities around you, and then the action associated with that observation. If you manage to be aware of your surroundings, not to listen while I talk and do other things, and generally engage with the people around you, be aware of what is going on, be present. And then when you see something that can actually make a difference for you or has an opening, some window of opportunity, you do something about it. Right? You learn from past patterns and you do things differently. That is luck, and you really can make your own luck. Now, still back to the original example of people who say that that their success is thanks to them, they usually mean other things. So they're still wrong about that. But luck really can be made. And so I want to just give you a couple of examples from my very crazy entrepreneurial path, and just to give you some examples of how initially unlucky I was when I or not aware and certainly not seizing opportunities. When I was still in college, I happened to meet, and you'll see this pattern in my life quite often. I was a member of an organization called ISEC, and for which I think is really a wonderful organization. I met an ISECer, an ISEC alum that was running one of the divisions in Asia for Disney. And, we hung out. We had this common bond around this organization. And he kind of exited my life for a few months. And then he called me one day and he said, hey, Ben, I was studying in Philadelphia at the time. He said, I'm going to be in the neighborhood. He was based in Singapore. Why don't you come and hang out with me? And I said, oh, wow, that's great. What hotel are you staying in? He said, I'm staying in the Grand Floridian. I said, well, there's no Grand Floridian in Philadelphia. And he said, no, it's in Orlando. But, it's in the neighborhood, so you just come and join me. And I was about to say, Orlando's too far away. How can I come down there, etc. But but he said, oh, don't worry, I'll pay for your flight. And so he brought me down to Orlando, where he proposed this concept that myself and another student, actually an MBA, I was an undergrad at the time, come and work with him in Asia for the summer. Now, I'd never been to Asia in my life. And I certainly never worked for a company as large as Disney. Certainly never, and the job was actually to start a new division within Disney and help them get it off the ground. And my initial reaction was absolute paralyzed fear. I had zero qualifications to actually do this job. I didn't know what I was doing. But luckily, my now friend who is getting his MBA said to me, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. You have to take it. And so he effectively had people push me to capture my life. And it really was the jump start to my career. It was an amazing opportunity. And really, it was completely eye-opening on so many levels. But a similar story repeated itself in the future. I met another a guy who tried to recruit me for a company that I decided to go to a different company instead. But he kept in touch with me, and he started a company on the side. And when I was 23, got it in his mind that I should quit my well-paying job and go and be an entrepreneur and be the CEO of this company that he started. And this was back in the dark ages when a 23-year-old CEO was unheard of as opposed to over the hill as it is today. So at the time, being a 23-year-old CEO did not make any sense for almost anybody, except him. And I, of course, immediately said no. And in fact, I said no for 90 days in a row until two events happened. One, he managed to kind of back me into a corner logically, where it didn't make any sense for me to say no, and I couldn't figure out why I'm saying no. But more importantly, I talked to my parents about it. And my parents, who are scientists, don't know anything about business, very conservative in their outlook, telling me, what are you doing? Like, why are you keeping this like random job that you can get at any point when you're being offered an opportunity to run a company? What are you, crazy? Quit immediately. And so they kind of helped me push on that thread. And so sometimes, even though you don't see yourself as lucky, even though you don't see the opportunities that are being presented in front of you, you have some support system that gives you that initial push to actually seize those opportunities. But that support system isn't always there, and eventually you do have to learn how to seize opportunities by yourself. And sometimes those opportunities aren't clear. Sometimes it's actually the avoidance, and really luck is the avoidance of things that can go very awry. So, as an example, fast forward a few years, I was the little company that I eventually did become the CEO of did not work out, part of being an entrepreneur, but it was a tremendous lesson in what not to do as a CEO of a company. And then I went and worked for Snapfish in its very early stages, and Snapfish was funded initially in the initial .com bubble. And Snapfish proved to me over the many years that I was there a tremendous lesson in how important timing is. We raised our first round in 1999, even before I joined the company. I joined a couple of months later. And then we raised our second round as the market was crashing in April of 2000. It was the worst month to raise venture capital funding in the history of venture capital up until September of 2001. So it was just a bloodbath. We somehow managed to pull off the round. And then 6 months later, after we raised $36 million, half the money was gone. Not because it was stolen, it's because we decided a really good strategy for the use of venture capital funds was to put a big pile of money in the middle of the office and then throw a match in and see what happens. It turns out it burns. And we didn't have, 6 months later, $18 million was gone. And so at that point, we decided that we needed to do something a little bit different. I became the company's CFO, and we started to cut the burn down. But the cold winter of the bubble explosion very much set in, and our board was, despondent. They wanted out, right? We had raised $42 million across the two rounds. We knew we would need some additional funding to keep on going, or at least we thought we did. And the board just wanted to sell. They wanted to sell at all costs. Now, as a CFO, I was trying to explain to them that paying a substantial amount of money for a company's stock and then selling at a discount is not a great way to make a return on your investment. That was not crystal clear to everybody. And even though we got our burn down quite substantially, everybody wanted us to sell, and we found a potential buyer. Now, at the time, Snapfish was not the personal publishing network you may know today, where you sell digital, where you share digital photos and get prints and photo books and things like that. It's the largest personal publishing network in the world. But at the time, we were really, the bulk of our business was actually people taking photos with film-based cameras, and they would send in film via the mail and have us process that film and send them their pictures back and upload a version of it online. Luckily, the very large company that was, at least from back then from our perspective, very large company that was processing our film and was seeing that even though we were still losing money, our volume was growing, we were getting more successful, they were benefiting from that, they were open to buying the company. We negotiated with them for quite a while, and we seemed to agree on prices. And now I had a very long scheduled trip with my family, actually, to Argentina at the time. And I didn't want to cancel the trip. But I said to them, because they were based in Maryland, we were based in San Francisco, I said, I will fly via Washington, D.C. For my vacation. We'll sit down, we'll go through the last bits of the financials and the due diligence, so you'll know that you really want to buy us. And then when I come back from vacation, we'll finish the deal and sign it off. They were okay with that, and I flew out. We had a great meeting, agreed on all the terms. Everything was good, and I went on vacation. And I came back, and we were supposed to sign the day after I came back. I came back on September 10th of 2001. The next day was a day known as September 11th, 2001. And needless to say, the deal we were supposed to sign vanished. Just disappeared. Because the world changed. And we were in an absolute panic. I mean, the board was, with everything else that was going on, of course, in the United States at the time, the board was convinced that after this event, it is absolute curtains for the company. We basically called up, we flew out. We actually took one of the first planes from San Francisco to the East Coast. The CEO of Snapfish and myself at the time. Also, by the way, after the largest terrorist attack in the history of the United States, flying with a 6'4" CEO of South Asian descent was not a pleasant experience for anybody involved during these very paranoid times in the United States. But we flew out and basically begged them to reconsider. They, of course, took the opportunity to dramatically lower the price, and paid a tiny fraction, or agreed to pay a tiny fraction of what it is that we agreed to initially to buy the company. But we salvaged the deal. And so we went back to San Francisco and then very methodically went through all of the things we needed to do to close the deal. You agree on the deal, you sign the contract, but you don't actually sell your company until all of the closing conditions are met. And so we had to transfer all of these contracts. We had to get our employees to sign new confidentiality agreements, new employment agreements. We had to transfer assets, all sorts of things. And we were almost all done, except one contract. One of our vendors, the vendor that happened to be our data hosting center. Today, everything is on the cloud, but back then we actually managed our own machines in big co-location facility. And they had to assign that contract over to the new owners. And the general counsel was out in the woods hiking. Now, bizarrely, most people on both sides were actually quite okay with waiting a few days until she came back from the hike. I remembered that just a month and a half before, when I decided to wait for and go on vacation, one day shaved substantial amounts of money off of the value of the deal that we were about to sign. And I didn't think that repeating waiting was a good idea. And so I called up this company and basically threatened to do all sorts of terrible things to them if they didn't find her on vacation and get her to sign. And somehow they tracked her down. She found a fax machine, and 15 minutes before the deadline to wire money from the East Coast to the West Coast hit, we got the fax, the money was wired, and the deal was done. The next day, a press release came out from the United States government. Now, something that a lot of people don't remember is that about a month and a half after September 11th, there was a bit of a scare because white powder, some analyzed later saw that it was actually anthrax, was mailed to various members of the United States Congress. And this was a big fear. They didn't know where the anthrax came from. They didn't know how serious the threat was. And on October the 25th, which was the day after we closed our deal, the United States government announced what their solution to the anthrax scare would be. Their solution was to put gigantic X-ray machines in 3 central post offices in the greater Washington, D.C. area and irradiate all of the film, or all of the mail, I should say, that comes through those post offices, including the post office that handled 100% of our film volume. Radiation, not good for film. That's in case any of you don't know that. And so, of course, the new owners, who were, of course, shocked and had to rearrange the whole thing, told us flat out that not only if that news came out the previous day, they would never have wired the money. They said that that deal would have been completely cooked, wouldn't have happened at all. 1 day's difference, 15 minutes difference, actually. Because if that general counsel took an extra 16 minutes, it's unclear whether or not Snapfish would even exist today. Now, that was damn lucky. Damn lucky. But it was understanding that patterns, not just when you're handed an opportunity, but when you see that patterns can come back and really hurt you, that you identify the same kinds of things that can happen in the future and make sure that they don't happen again. That's another very important component of luck. And then there's, I think, the most bizarre form of luck. And this is really the kind that I experienced in my journey with Minerva. And I'll talk a lot more about Minerva. Well, welcome you to join me afterwards if you want to kind of get into how do you build the world's greatest university from scratch, which is what we've been doing. But the luck that is associated with Minerva is a little bit, it feels, I should say, a little bit more mystical. It feels a little bit less rational. But I think that there's rationality to it as well. It was actually explained to it by one of the great supporters that we have at Minerva. And so the journey for Minerva was an interesting one. Very brief. Minerva is trying to redefine what the world's greatest universities should look like. We're trying to do that by actually creating the world's greatest university and forcing every other university to copy us. And so I spent about 18 months as I started working on this. This was an idea I actually had as an undergraduate to reform my university as opposed to start a new one. But for 18 months, I went and talked to people to figure out what is this formula. Not just how to create a new institution, but how to create a new system, a new way of thinking about what it is that university education should all be about. Focused on the student, focused on the outcomes of the student. Enriching the curriculum, the way that we teach through the pedagogical methods, where we teach, where the students live and congregate, what do they do. And for a year and a half, I had hundreds of meetings with people from all walks of life, academics, parents, journalists, investors, people who just were in the business community, a lot of people who had opinions, almost all of which thought that I was somewhere between delusional and completely out of my mind, somewhere in that range. But their questioning and feedback and ideas did help me iterate. It did help me think through the plan. And every time I had an idea that was, I don't know, somewhere to try to compromise, right? Somebody would say, oh, well, this can't be done. This is too difficult. It's too perfect. It's too ideal. And I would try to insert something that would tone it down. It wound up kind of bouncing back, kind of like almost like rubber. Kind of rejected concepts. The system wasn't really fault tolerant very much of compromise. And so at some point, the plan came together enough so that when I started to talk to people that weren't in your kind of day-to-day thinking about it for 3 seconds, but actually lived and breathed higher education, have thought about it, thought about the problems in higher education, how to solve them, I started talking to them, they said, wait, you've got something here. This can actually work. And eventually, those conversations I took to the investment community. I was very lucky to find Benchmark Capital, who've been tremendous supporters of Minerva ever since. They gave us the initial funding that we needed. And that support, after which, by the way, everybody who thought I was insane and crazy or delusional now, of course, thought I was a complete genius, and they knew it all along. And of course, I hope I'm not insane, but I'm certainly not a genius. So the fact that they were following the trends was really less of an indication of how my luck had changed, but much more so about how they wanted to feel like they were always supportive of something that they now saw that could actually work. But in the process, I realized that I had this tremendously complex idea, and I had people who gave a lot of money to the cause. Benchmark committed $25 million to Minerva, and Minerva didn't exist. It was just me. I didn't have a single employee. I didn't have any technology. I didn't have a building for where the students lived. I didn't have accreditation. I didn't even have a partner to work with. I had nothing. I just had this plan. And I realized that now that I had this plan and $25 million, I actually had to do something about this. This was not easy. And I didn't know how to build any of the things that I said we needed to build. I wasn't a technologist. I was a finance guy. I wasn't an academic. I couldn't build a curriculum. I didn't know how to go and find the students. I didn't know how to deal with the university system and get accreditation. I didn't know any of this stuff. So I actually had to find people who would know. And the most amazing thing is that they all just happened to fall in my lap. And not people who, could get the job done, but literally people that if you were to sit down and write the ideal job description or the ideal person to fit a job description, you would genetically construct this team. Didn't make any sense. My chief product officer was the first executive. I hired Jonathan Katzman. Was one of the great product gurus in the Valley. Been in 3 different startups, all of which sold. It took small companies and made them large, took ideas and launched them, had extremely loyal teams, knew how to manage both engineers and product folks. Phenomenal. Had a deep passion for education and wanted to do something substantial. Terry Canner, chief student officer, an accreditation officer, was perhaps the foremost accreditation expert in the country. She had been the executive vice president of the accreditor for 7 years, had phenomenal relationships with universities all across our region, and regional accreditation is how accreditation is done in the United States, and was able to think through what the institution needed to look like such that it would work both for our ideals and to satisfy the requirements of the academic community, and was transformational in getting us to work. And by the way, I met JK, Jonathan, because a friend of mine met him a year before, and he got us together. And I realized, if this actually comes to fruition, I should talk to him. And I did. The only person I looked at for this job. Terry, I was trying to work with somebody else, and he called me and said, look, your idea is too crazy for me, but this person had just left the accreditor yesterday. If you call her today, you may be able to get her before she's snagged by somebody else. And she was working for me by the following day. And so there were just people who were exactly the right folks to find. Robin Goldberg, our chief marketing officer, was somebody who didn't just understand how to build a brand, but she understood the entire sales process. She understood both from the enterprise perspective as well as the consumer perspective. She had 2 kids who were about to enter college and understood deeply what our customer was all about. Right? Stephen Coslin, our founding dean, was not only on the Harvard faculty for 30-some years, not only one of the great social scientists alive, not only dean of social science back then, the director of the Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Science, but he's one of the world's foremost experts on how the mind works. He had appointments in so many departments at Harvard. They actually had appointments at 4 different schools at Harvard. And so he was somebody who understood the breadth of academia while understanding the depth that's associated with what we needed to do to create a transformational university. And I could go on and on. Now, the difference, and by the way, I met Stephen because I bumped into his wife at a conference. Literally. And after a lunch and a dinner, Stephen was working at Minerva. So that type of luck isn't just around being able to identify who's around you, which is, of course, important. It's not just about having the right timing in, reaching out to people, which, of course, is important. But there's something else about that kind of luck. There's something else that's associated, and which I didn't understand until actually quite recently. It's something about doing and performing something or working on something that's not just your life's work, that doesn't just matter to you, but that it is a cause that others can rally around. And not superficially, but deeply. The kind of luck that's generated by thinking through not just how do I make everybody wealthy in my company because we're going to sell these widgets, or not just about, we're going to have a good time, but something that matters. The difference between working to achieve one type of goal versus working to achieve something that will generate many types of goals that people are passionate about. And the luck comes in the formulation and having to go through the trials and tribulations to find the process, to define the system that can then withstand the kinds of barriers that you'll have when you try to put it into implementation, but more importantly, that will then create the environment for opportunity for you to take advantage of. Without the 18 months of people throwing daggers at the idea, of them forcing me to answer every question, to think through all of the scenarios, without the luck of people doubting the concept in very, very mean ways, by the way, but without the luck of having to have gone through that, I wouldn't have been able to be in a position to even find these tremendous individuals who've really pulled off the impossible. And so, if I leave you with one concept, is that luck is extremely important in business. It's even more important in being an entrepreneur. And even though, that you rely on luck and you rely on things to happen around you, you do have a hand in it. It is important. And so the next time when you talk to someone after you're successful and they ask you, were you lucky or good? You can tell them, I was lucky. But you'll know that it means you were also pretty good. So thank you, and happy to take any questions.